Next item on the list is openings, doors, windows, etc., etc. So this particular one shows 3 different types of bucking. The one on the left is if you're using a full width buck, which matches up both sides of the width of the actual ICF you're using. And then the one on the right is if you just want to do the center core only. So you would cut that down. If it's a 6-inch core, you'd probably use a 2x6, screw it to one side, foam the gap that's left, and then screw the other side together once that foam is set up. The most important part of these window bucks is the bottom is always left open in some manner to allow you to get concrete into the bottom of that sill and also to vibrate. The one in the middle is probably my most preferred buck. And the reason I like it is because you have the buck goes to the inside of the outside panel, to the inside of the inside panel, and it keeps that insulation all the way around the buck on the outside, but it gives you something to fasten your trim to on the inside of the wall. This particular one works really well with our R30 products because the 6-inch R30 is basically 9¼ inches, so a 2x10 works perfect. And on the 8-inch product, it's a 2x12 becomes 11¼ and it just works out exactly the way you're supposed to work it. Any other time, we tend to have to rip that wood and make it fit that so it's tight, flush on both sides of the ICF. If you're using treated lumber or untreated lumber or pressure treated lumber, in most cases you should have something in between the concrete and the wood, more so for the untreated. So what you want to do is wrap it in poly, use a sill gasket stapled around where it's going to match up to the concrete especially. And the other thing about using the sill gasket is it's a bit of a sponge. So when the concrete shrinks during drying, that helps seal that even. And then there's fastening the bucks to the concrete. So you can put screws or nails in through and leave the head sticking up to grab the concrete. And we can also use a power nail and come from below and put it in, shoot them in on an angle. All you're trying to do is catch that wet concrete. So when it dries around the screws, the nails, whichever, it's holding that buck to the concrete properly. So when it comes to window reinforcement, again, Amvic has the Canadian Design Guide and the American Design Guide to allow us to check and make sure we're following the guides that we have to adhere to for the different building codes. 2 types of reinforcing, in my opinion. One is for reinforcing the buck itself for the weight of concrete that's going to be in there. So here's a very quick example of a vertical horizontal support inside that buck to keep the sides and top and bottom from bowing. Here's how it looks as a nice cutaway, just to give you an idea what's really happening at your webs. You got your buck. The buck is open at the bottom, and it's reinforced horizontally and vertically to take the weight for when you pour that concrete in there. In most cases, you're going to have some kind of rebar in the bottom. This one in particular shows 2 10M bars across the bottom of the opening, expanding 24 inches each way to create almost like a grade beam below that window to help with strength. You're going to have 2 10 or 15M bars vertical on each side of the opening, which gives you that nice box look and reinforcement for tilting of that window buck. And then you can have some kind of lentil design. It could be as little as 1 rebar, multiple rebars. It could be a top and bottom rebar system whereby you have stirrups. The tables have all that information depending on the length of that opening. And then you have the whole wall assembly. It's pretty awesome to see a cutaway like this where you can see the actual vertical, horizontal reinforcement rebar along with what's required around an opening. So you got your bottom rebar sticking 2 feet past, you got your lentil sticking 2 feet past at the top, and then you have the extra vertical reinforcement on each side of the opening to help just strengthen that wall all the way around that complete opening. And then there's exterior reinforcement. So you want to tie that buck back to the wall. So in this particular case, we just simply put cleats around that fasten into the webs and also into that buck so that if you have to tilt that wall or do anything with that wall, the window buck has become part of that wall